Hello again, my lovelies. So, if you haven't watched it already, I made a video on the greater Percy Jackson Greco-Roman Rick Riordan series, which is going to be linked in the card above. And that is where I introduced my tea and my candle for today, because I'm making these videos on the same day. So now what I'm going to do is move into my other favorite Rick Riordan series, which is the Kane Chronicles series. This is a book series that I don't see talked about a lot, and I think deserves so much more than what it kind of gets, especially from the fans of the Percy Jackson series. It's a really simple book series with just being a trilogy, as compared to a lot of Rick Riordan's other books with every single part of the Percy Jackson series and Heroes of Olympus and Apollo series all being 5-book series rather than trilogies, with 15 total books over the course of that Greco-Roman series, the 5th one coming out, the 5th in the Apollo series, 15th in the overall coming out soon. And the Kane Chronicles kept it more simplistic. It's 3 main books. There's 3 short stories, I believe, that are crossovers with Percy Jackson. And then there's a few, re-editions that he's done that are, graphic novel versions of the books and stuff like that. But they are completely different from the Percy Jackson series in the way that the story is told, in kind of the feel of the story. The tone is still similar, but you get this different way of looking at mythology. From the beginning of the first book, there is a sense of truth to the stories, with the author's note being that this is just the transcript that Rick Riordan has written from a tape that he was sent by these 2 children, and that this is a real story by Sadie and Carter Kane, who had really experienced these events. And when you're 10, 12, 14, 15 reading these books, that's a really cool feeling that you don't kind of get in a lot of other young adult novels, is the idea of, it's fiction, but the suspension of disbelief to believe that it's real being even greater than just a normal fiction book where you want to kind of believe that within this world this is happening. The idea that not just within this world is the Kane Chronicles happening, but within our world. And it's a different approach to the idea of incorporating the mythology and the gods than what Percy Jackson took, because the Percy Jackson series focused on the idea of what if your parent was a god, which the Kane Chronicles toys with, but not in the same way. In the Percy Jackson books, it's very directly like, you have a mortal parent, you have a godly parent, you are a demigod, go off and be your new version of Heracles and Perseus. For those who don't know, Heracles is the Greek name for Hercules. Hercules is the Roman version of the story, but in the common knowledge that isn't really out there because of the fame of the Disney movie, which went with the Greek legend and a lot of alterations, but the Roman name, for ease of pronunciation, I suppose. If you want to know more about that, hit me up in the comments, and maybe I'll broaden my horizons from just books and do a history lesson on Greco-Roman stuff and how it gets messed up in the common knowledge. But back to the Kane Chronicles. They don't do this same direct one-to-one idea of parent equal god, you equal demigod. And they play a lot more with the fact that the Egyptian mythology was not so cut and dry in that same way. It kind of, as fluctuating as Greco-Roman mythology was, Egyptian mythology was even more fluctuating. Stories contradict themselves about who these people were and how they interacted in the idea of the gods, and who was related to who and how, and who had what power, and different versions of different gods with the multiple aspects of Ra. And Rick Riordan does a really good job in that series of incorporating all of these different aspects of Egyptian history and mythology into a series in a very consumable way for young readers and young adult readers. But also just for adult readers who don't know anything about Egypt or Egyptology or Egyptian mythology. And they do this really cool thing of making the characters magicians in place of demigods. The idea that Egypt believed that pharaohs ruled by divine right, and that the pharaoh was chosen to rule by the gods, and often that the pharaoh was a god, or was akin to a god. And so they took that idea and went, okay, all of the pharaohs, they thought they were gods. They were actually hosts to gods. And the reason that they had the ability to host the gods was because they were magic. Cool. I'm on board. Sign me up, Rick Riordan. I love that concept. The idea of flipping this belief on its head in that way was really cool to young me, and still is. And so following the story of this brother and sister is really neat. Especially, I personally am not a big fan of books that change perspective often. I'm gonna put up some other videos that aren't just rave reviews about books I love on this channel soon, and for some of them, that's a big sticking point. I will stop reading a book partway through if I feel that the perspective shifts are ruining it for me and making it hard for me to follow. But the way that the Kane Chronicles incorporated these perspective shifts was a lot easier for me, because a lot of books do it by choosing a couple characters to follow that are in different points in a story, so they're in different aspects of the world, and their stories are going to eventually converge, but they don't converge until like 3/4 of the way through the book, so you're just kind of following multiple storylines for a while. I find that really hard to follow. I don't like having to keep track of, like, okay, so-and-so is in this part of this world doing this, and so-and-so is in this part of this world, or this time period doing this, and, like, which chapter am I reading, especially if it shifts every other chapter. Like, I can't personally do that very well. Kane Chronicles, it's one story. The plot is the same throughout, and the changes in perspective don't change what point of the story you're at or who you're following in terms of location nearly as often. It happens sometimes when one of them will go off and do something alone. You might get a little bit of that, but for the most part, they're usually together. And so it doesn't really matter whose perspective it is in terms of the plot. It just adds some different color to what you're getting from the plot, because Sadie and Carter's ideas of what a situation is and their approaches to that are completely different from each other. They don't look at a situation in the same light because of how they were raised and who they are as people. And so that's a really cool aspect of getting to see this brother-sister and how they see the world and how they interact with each other, and what it means to be basically a preteen teen and be magical and have the power of hosting gods and having to deal with that, and the idea of having a whole nother person inside of you who just can, like, whisper in your brain, and, like, it's a very weird, like, kind of personal invasion feeling to think about, but they do it in such, like, Rick Riordan describes it in such a way that you don't feel fully creeped out. Like, you feel it a little because they feel it a little, but you're just kind of going along for the journey with them. Like, you feel like you're there, you're present, this could be you. And I think that the Kane Chronicles does that even better than the Percy Jackson series did, with the idea of feeling like you could be a part of this world. Which is a really nice escapist kind of thing, especially as, like, a fantasy-adjacent young adult book. That's what a lot of people look for in fantasy books, is that escapism. And they do it really well. And, you know, it's been a few years since I reread them last, but they're a really nice little kind of short idea of what this world is, and you get these 3 books, and then you're done. And he never pushed it, and, you know, as much as a person who really loves these stories, I would love more content, it feels finished, and it feels like you got a glimpse into this world, and it was really cool while it lasted. And I think that's one of the things I like the most about it, is it doesn't feel stretched out in the way that almost, I feel like Heroes of Olympus kind of did. I didn't really talk about this in my Heroes of Olympus video, but with the 5 books, it kind of felt like a little too much. Like, the first 2 books were really cool. 3rd book, where they all got to meet each other, really cool. Another 2 books of their journey was, like, a lot. It was a lot less of the monster of the week feel of the first 5 Percy Jackson books, which were kind of monster of the book. There was the overarching theme, but, like, it was a lot more like, here's the individual threat, but we've also got this big boy threat. Heroes of Olympus didn't do that as much. But back in Trials of Apollo, they've kind of brought that back, with there being one individual focus for each book, but then an overarching thread. So I kind of enjoy that. And that was a lot easier to achieve with the Kane Chronicles, because it was only 3 books. So the overarching thread didn't need to be stretched out as long, and kind of more consumable in that way. So I really love those books. And I really recommend, if you haven't read them, to try them. Try the first one. Comment below. Let me know what you think. Find me on Goodreads. Let me know. Did my review make you want to read them? Did you pick them up and then decide they're not for you? Do you feel like I'm completely wrong? Like, let me know. I want to hear from you. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a like. You can feel free to subscribe to my channel if you want. This isn't about subscribers for me, so if you want to subscribe to see more content, I'd love that. If not, keep on living your life. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a good day.